Hey, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this Good Ideas webinar series focused on public education and the Texas legislature. I'm Veronica Garcia, and I am Good Reason Houston's Director of Policy. Good Reason Houston exists to accelerate public school improvement across Houston. We believe that every child in every neighborhood deserves access to a world-class public school education. Today, we're going to find out what lawmakers are discussing this legislative session and the impact on students and public schools. Joining us is State Representative Harold Dutton, Chair of the House Public Education Committee. Chair Dutton has served longer on this committee than any other member in Texas history, 17 legislative sessions. And sir, correct me if I get it wrong. He has served 19 legislative sessions overall and is third in seniority in the Texas House. Chair Dutton is a native of Fifth Ward, Houston, an alum of Phyllis Wheatley High School and Texas Southern University. Chair Dutton, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We are honored.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Veronica. I think we've been seeing each other for quite a number of years now, and I appreciate all your support. And I especially like to thank your organization too. I mean, we don't have enough in the way of sometimes groups that participate in public ed. In fact, when I got on this committee originally way back in 1985, one of my friends said to me, "Well, Harold, why you get on there? They don't even have lobbyists that come to that committee." And I thought, well, I got on it because education was always important to me. And I will tell you this, of the 34 House committees, I believe that the Public Education Committee dictates more about Texas's future than absolutely any committee in the House. And so I am honored to be able to lead that committee. You were right, I have served on there longer than anybody in the history of Texas. So I appreciate it. I tell people all the time, I'm not responsible for all the bad things that happen, but I'll take responsibility, credit for all the good things that happen. But I'm looking forward to it because, you know, when you talk about the 5.5 million students in Texas, the 350,000 teachers or more, the 1,200 school districts, nothing to me could be more than making sure that we do what's necessary to make Texas have a great and bright future.
100%, sir. I appreciate all of those comments that you just said and the recognition that you have of the importance of this committee and the impact that it's having on our students across the state. For those that may be watching that don't live in this world of the Texas legislature, you know, just to kind of start off, you know, what does it even mean to be the chair of the House Public Education Committee? What does your role look like?
Well, let me start with the way I usually start with groups that are talking about the legislature or talking about one of the committees, that everything here is political. What that means is that you have to get a majority of votes to do whatever you want to. The Public Education Committee is a 13-member committee, and we have everybody on there from Republicans, Democrats, school teachers. We have business people on there. We have school board members, former school board members who are on there. And so it is a diverse committee, and I'm charged with trying to lead that committee, but at the same time work with them to ensure that we do everything we can to enhance public education in the state. And I'm so proud of this committee. It's a little bit easier because most of them understand the issues as well as I do, and understand the challenges that we face. And so that makes it a little bit easier for me as the public ed chair. But I will say this, everybody that runs for office generally has a solution to public ed problems. And at least what they think are public ed problems. And sometimes we have to, having been there as long as I have, I've been through some of these solutions, which I have to remind members of that we tried that before. That doesn't work, or that doesn't fix what you think is broken. And so my attitude is that as the chair, one of the things I get to do is kind of guide the committee in the right direction. And one of the things that I wanted to do most is that in the past, we have we have come together as a committee and we have done a lot of work, a lot of, good work, tough work, but we've gotten it done for the masses number of children in the state. And what we've done is we've raised the ceiling, so to speak, in terms of education, public education. And one of the things I think we've got to do is raise the floor. We've got to raise the floor for a lot of children who are at the bottom and who now have been adversely impacted by the pandemic. So that I said many of these children have now created a new bottom in public education. And so we're going to be doing everything we can to make sure that we get some sort of elimination of this education learning deficit that's taken place because of the pandemic.
I appreciate that. You mentioned about the importance of raising the floor. What does that look like?
Well, we have numbers of children who, and let me start this way. One of the things I have recognized, and since I've had this job, I've been reading lots of things about public education and trying to just make sure that I kind of understand the issues a little bit better. One of the things that we find out is that children, for example, who leave third grade, for example, who aren't functioning at a third grade level, generally don't have very much in the way of success navigating through public schools to get to a high school to graduate. They simply don't show up. One of the things I have also said and recognized is that we have done lots of things regarding, for example, dropouts. We've looked at ninth grade having programs, but what I've said is that children don't tend to drop out at ninth grade. That's when they leave. They dropped out in third grade when they weren't educated so they could be masters of the subject matter. And as a consequence, as they moved along through the system, the only thing that happened is they got further and further behind. And as they get further and further behind, I've said on many occasions that we take a little bit of hope from these children until they finally reach the ninth grade and become hopeless to where they just say, education's not for me. I think we've got to change that. We've got to do everything we can to ensure that every student that comes out of third grade, for example, is on third grade level in terms of the basics. And we've got to do everything we can to eliminate the deficit in learning that's now existing because some of these kids haven't been taught. One of the things you have to recognize is that colleges and universities in the state and perhaps all over the country are having to do multiple remediation courses once students even get to college. So now you're talking about the kids who've actually graduated from high school and gone to college. Well, a lot of them who haven't graduated, who didn't graduate but left, they're even further behind. And so we've got to do everything we can to do that. And so when I'm talking about raising the floor, I'm talking about ensuring that every child that comes through our public schools has a chance, has a future that's aided by the kind of education we dictate to them and make sure that they get. And so we're going to be doing that in our public education committee. I can remember times that we debated the issue of whether or not there were children you ought to have algebra 1, for example, to be a graduate of high school. Well, there's some kids who don't get general math, who at that level really the argument just ignores them altogether. But what I'm talking about in raising the floor is I'm talking about every kid getting to algebra 1 and making sure that they can do that. That's a challenge, I know, but at the end of my term as chairman of this committee, I hope that one thing is said about this committee, and that is we improve student outcomes. We improve student outcomes for not only kids at the top, but the kids at the bottom as well.
Sir, how have you seen public education change over the past 17 sessions that you've served on this committee?
Well, I think House Bill 3 last session uh, was was the epitome of success and the changes that have taken place in education. And when I came aboard, one of the first things I read in 1985 was the H. Ross Perot report regarding public education. I was interested then in public education because I looked at my own high school and I looked at schools in Northeast Houston. And one of the things I began to determine is that the, the education achievement levels was slowly being eroded, and I wasn't sure why. And in fact, what has happened is that in Northeast Houston, for example, where I live, um, I think sometimes we've said that HISD was more in the transportation business than the education business, because most of these kids have to, if you want a great education, you had to get on a bus to go across town to get an education. One of the things I think we've got as one of the greatest challenges for us is to make sure that the school around the corner is as great as the school across town. And so we're gonna do that. I've said that's something that's uncompromising as far as I'm concerned. I know we can do it, and I'm certainly going to make every effort to make sure our committee meets that challenge so that kids have a future. I mean, it's clear to all of us on here that what got us to where we are is public education. And I know people come through with all kinds of things about homeschooling, about private education, about this and that and norm. But the bottom line is that most students are going to be in public education. And having talked about public education, we have the two ways we deliver public education: through traditional public schools and through charter schools. And I don't buy into the argument that they're in competition necessarily with each other. I think that what's happening is that we are trying to provide a way for all students, given their particular perspective on how they want to be, how they want to choose, or how they choose to be educated, to even choose a traditional school or a charter school. But in any case, we want to make sure that every kid gets educated.
Absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit more about what are specifically your public education priorities this legislative session?
Well, one of the things we've got to do, and I've said this to the committee, is that because of where we are right now, both and which has been influenced greatly by this pandemic and having students away from school, and we'd like to think they've been in remote learning, but I'm not sure remote learning what. But we've got to somehow or another eliminate the learning deficit that's been advanced during this pandemic, because we've lost so many children. Somebody told me that we've lost upwards, or we can't find, not lost, but we can't find about 44% of the kids who are not showing up at school. And the fact of the matter is, most of these kids are in the grades where you begin education. I mean, the grades pre-K through first, second, third, and fourth and fifth grade. Those are the children that are lost, which means that learning deficit doesn't just stay there. It transfers throughout their whole education career. And so we've got to do everything we can this session to make sure we dent that learning deficit as much as we can. One of the things I've thought about doing is having a system where we have tutoring in this state that's provided to students. I have also said that one of the greatest opportunities to do tutoring is utilizing some of our retired teachers, for example. Retired teachers some of whom could perhaps work 2 or 3 hours or 1 hour a day, or 5 hours a week or something, but they could actually come in and help students get the kind of basic education that we want them to have, and begin to erode this education gap that's taking place simply because kids have not been in school. And so that's one of my highest priorities. We're going to do another thing is, I know school districts were concerned about whether they were going to be dinged because these kids aren't in school, or whether or not they were going to be fully funded, just as it were during the last October um, student count. And so we've decided to do what we call a, really create an incentive, hold harmless and an incentive for school districts to go out and find these children to get them back in school. Because one of the things we recognize is that we have about 350,000 students in this state who don't have access to digital learning. And they don't have access to digital learning because they either don't have computers or they don't have access to adequate Wi-Fi. We have about another 700,000 to 1 million students who have access to Wi-Fi, but it's not adequate. I mean, it's less than the 25 BPSs. And so we end up having a difficult time doing mass digital learning. And so we've got to get these kids back in school. But at the same time, I think we've got to, Veronica, I think we've got to start to think about how we deliver education services in the state. What we've done typically is that we've sort of built on the little red schoolhouse concept, and that's where we are. And so we now build huge buildings sometimes to accommodate students. And what the pandemic, I think, has said to us is that we at least need to begin to think about how we're going to do this in the future. I don't think 20, 30, 50 years from now, none of us may not be here, but I don't think we'll be doing education in the same way that we're doing it now. And I don't think students will be receiving education services the same way they are now. And so we got to begin today taking a look at how that's going to happen and what we need to do about it now to prepare for it.
Certainly, the time gives us an opportunity, right,
Right,
to become very innovative. Uh,
right,
I wanted to ask you specifically about House Bill 3270 that you have filed.
right,
It's received some attention. There was a story in the Houston Chronicle, I think about a couple weeks ago.
right.
Can you tell us, what does the bill do and what is your intent in the filing of the bill?
Well, let me go back at the beginning. I filed in 2015. Jimmy Don Aycock was the chair of House Public Education Committee. And he and I had been working for a long time on trying to get schools in certain neighborhoods outfitted so that they can generate students who are competitive everywhere. One of the things we saw was that many school campuses were simply getting worse. They were simply get worse, even though we had been trying to get school districts to pay more attention to them. I went to Jimmy Don, and Jimmy Don said to me, "Well, Harold, how would you fix it?" I said, "Well, let me think about it." And what I had done is I had talked to the school board members in Houston, in HISD. And what I found is that many of them, while we have 9-member elected single member districts, that some of them felt that because they didn't live in the area where the school I was complaining about, since they didn't live in that area and didn't represent that area, they had nothing to do with improving that school and that improving that school campus. And I said, no, you may get elected in one district, but you have a responsibility for all of HISD. And so after thinking about that and going to Jimmy Don Aycock, the chairman, he said, "Well, Harold, how would you fix that?" I said, "Well, I would do something that creates skin in the game for all of them, so that even if you represent a West Side district, you'd have an interest in a Northeast school campus." And so he said, "How would you fix it?" I said, "Well, look, here's what I think. I think that what we need to do is fix the bill with an amendment that says if a school campus, if you have one campus in a school district that is low performing, and I initially said for 3 consecutive school years, then the state could come over and take over your district." Jimmy Don Aycock said, "Well, Harold, 3 is pretty tough, but let's do 5." I said, "Okay, I'll do 5 or 10 or whatever. I just wanted to stop." And so we agreed on 5. The amendment got on the bill in 2015. It was otherwise known as House Bill 1842. And so it got on, and everybody at the time supported the bill. Even the teachers' unions were in support of the bill. And HISD and none other school district came down here and testified against it. So along comes a Wheatley High School, and this is what's to me is, I mean, is really challenging. Wheatley High School happens to be, if not the worst, among the worst high school educationally in the state. It's in my district, and it's also the high school I graduated from, as you said in the intro. I think we've got to fix that. Now, what the bill does, because HISD filed the lawsuit challenging the education commissioner's right to come in to take over the school district under House Bill 1842, the courts have ruled that there were certain inconsistencies in the law regarding House Bill 1842 and prior law statutes regarding improving schools. And they have looked at that. And what I've tried to do in House Bill 3270 was eliminate the kinds of conflicts that the court used as a basis for stopping the TEA takeover of HISD. Interestingly enough, HISD is the only school district out of the 1,200 or so school districts in the state who are absolutely opposed to the idea. And I don't understand why they would be opposed to it, because all they'd have to do, in my opinion, to stay out of the sanctions that are designed in this bill is fix the schools. And I know they can fix the schools, but because they have fixed schools before. And so why the schools in Northeast Houston? I looked at not only Wheatley, I looked at the 2 middle schools rather, that feed into Wheatley. They were less than adequate. I looked at the elementary schools that feed into those middle schools, and for the most part, they were less than adequate and not meeting expectations. And so it seems to me that while I hoped when I passed the amendment on to House Bill 1842, I just couldn't conceive that we would ever get to a point where HISD would let that happen, where they would, that the threat of the takeover by the state would cause them to change certain things. For example, and I'll give you this real quickly, Veronica. Cashmere High School was in the tank as far as education was concerned. One of the things I did is I looked at Cashmere High School and why were they not doing well on the standardized test, for example. What I found out was that Cashmere students had just simply not done well on the math portion of the standardized test. And then I went and looked at why are they not doing well? Well, what I found out is that they didn't have certified math teachers in that whole, not only at Cashmere, but in that whole chain of schools that feed into Cashmere. And so I couldn't figure out, well, wait, why does Cashmere not have a certified math teacher? Well, that's something we can fix. And I figured that the school board ought to take an example from, say, Dallas. HISD ought to take an example from Dallas ISD, that what they did is to improve their schools. They sent their best teachers to their worst problem. And that's unlike what I find in many school districts, especially in HISD. Now, I'm not saying teachers are bad or bad or good or whatever, but what I'm saying is some teachers may not be a fit for that particular school, and that causes students not to do well in that school. And so to the extent we want to improve the school, we're going to have to match up the right fit with the students in that school, with the teachers that flow into that school. And that's what the House Bill 3270 is designed to do, is to simply eliminate these conflicts that were found by the court, so that the TEA commissioner, and we charge the TEA commissioner with actually making sure that students are getting what they ought to get. Now, some people don't understand that school districts are really fictional notions in the law because the state constitution says that the TEA, the state, has the responsibility of providing education services, but we do it through school districts. Now, if you go back in the 50s, Texas did away with about 6,000 school districts under what was called the Gilmer-Aiken Act at the time. And so we found that we didn't need certain school districts because what we did find, though, was that school districts have been created by people who were coming to the legislature so that their kids didn't go to school with certain kids, or they were trying to capture certain wealth for themselves. And so that's one of the things we took a look at, and that's how we got down to about the 1,200 school districts. But again, the bill is designed to make sure that we facilitate it's not about the takeover of HSD and making that easy. It's designed to cause the state to make sure that we have education quality in all of our schools.
Thank you for walking through that bill with us, Chair Dutton. And we really only have time for one more question. And so I wanted to ask you, what does a successful legislative session look like for students?
Well, what it looks like for students is, as I mentioned before, hopefully student outcomes improve. That's what we got to do. We've got to do everything we can to ensure that student outcomes are on the increase, not of the decline. I think that is a travesty for us as state legislators and even as school districts if we allow any campus to decline, because what we've done in that case is we've consigned these students to about the grimmest future you could do for students. And I want for students all over Texas, the same as I would want for my own kids, for my own children. I would want them to have the same thing. I have my oldest daughter. She went to Howard University in DC. Then she went to University of Texas Dental School. My next daughter, she went to Xavier University in New Orleans. And then she went to Southern Cal's Med School. My next son went to Morehouse and graduated Phi Beta Kappa. My next son went to University of Oklahoma, got his engineering degree, and then got an MBA from University of Texas. And my next son graduated more recently from the New School for Jazz and Contemporary Music in New York. And so I want for every child the same thing as I would want for my child. And we're going to ensure that that happens.
Well, sir, you are rightly so. You must be very proud.
Yeah, I am. I tell people I stayed out the way long enough for them to succeed educationally. So I am. It's one of the blessings I've had is to have a group of kids who understand what education was about. And I tell people, my kids were a blessing to me because. And most of them just worked hard. Most of them had great teachers in their schools because they're all a product of HSD.
Yeah.
They're all a product of HSD. So I couldn't figure out if HSD can do all that, then why can't they do that now? And I think they can.
Thank you so much, sir, for your time today. That is all the time that we have. This went by really quickly.
Well, call me and we'll do it again.
That sounds great.
Well, thank you all.
I know how busy you are. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Thank you for those of y'all that tuned in today. Many thanks for joining us. And I hope that you will join us again on April 13th for our next Good Ideas webinar with Marvin Pierre. He is an educational entrepreneur who's launching an innovative new school model. You can register and find more details on our website at goodreasonhouston.org/events. Thank you all for listening. Bye.